I read 6 books in April, and you know what? None of them sucked. I loved one of them. I enjoyed most of them. A couple were fine, but I think like just not for me. But none of them were bad. And I will say as well that there was definitely a colour scheme going on with my reads in April, and I don't know if that was a subliminal thing and like I was choosing books off my shelf as part of the colour scheme or if it was purely coincidental. But look, they all go together. They all are blue, green, and yellow. Incredible. Hello, welcome to my April reading wrap up. I'm Cameron, this is Slaggy Book Club, and if you're new here, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already, click subscribe, join the book club. I am so happy to have you. I had a very lovely month full of friends and food and laughs and love, and it is very much winter now, and I love winter, and so I've been having a very cozy time. I've been enjoying rugging up and getting all snuggly, so I'm very happy. And most importantly, I was admitted to hospital one less time than I was in March, so that's a win. You know, I was looking at the books that I read last month, and they are 50-50 books I was sent and books that I bought. And I was tidying my TBR shelf last night, and I think there's like 12 books on that shelf, and 2 of them are books that I bought. So lately, the majority of books that I'm reading are not books that I have, gone out and bought for myself because they were on my TBR. The majority of the books I'm reading are books that have been sent to me, which is wild and such a privilege that I will never get over, and I will always talk about and be very grateful for and not take for advantage. And I will also still always talk honestly about books. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm never going to let that compromise my integrity or anything. But it is just weird to think about because I've certainly gone from, and as well, like, it probably is in large part due to the fact that I am just not going out and buying books because I'm trying to save money. It's not like there are no books that I want to buy. There are a lot of books on my TBR. I'm sure you get it. But it is just, it's interesting because, yeah, I went from a place of every book I read was a book that I had discovered and thought, fuck, I want to read this, and gone out and got it, and then read it. And now it's like, I'm just being handed these books and I'm like, oh yeah, this seems good. And so I read it, and it's a different experience in terms of like, I guess there's almost less excitement or like less, I don't know. I mean, a lot of us say that like buying books is almost more enjoyable than actually reading them, you know? And so I guess I've just been missing out on that feeling, that dopamine that comes from, opening up my Goodreads TBR list and walking into a bookstore and buying books that have been on my list for ages. But yes, that's not to say that I'm not extremely grateful for all of the ARCs and review copies that publishers so generously send me. It is a good problem to have. All of that being said, the first book that I read in April was one that I went out and bought because it was on my TBR. It is White on White by, now my English brain wants to say I Sigul Savas, but there's just no way in hell that that's how it's said. I mean, look at those accents. I don't know. I really enjoyed reading this book, but to be honest with you, at this point, I don't think I could actually properly tell you what it was actually about. I know that there is this woman, the protagonist is this woman who is studying art history, maybe doing a PhD or something. She's studying art history, and she rents this place of this older couple to board at while she's studying. And then the wife of that older couple shows up one day and she's like, I'm so sorry, I'm gonna have to stay here for a while, something's gone down with my husband. Don't worry about me, like I'm just gonna be upstairs, I'm gonna be painting, I'm gonna stay out of your hair, no worries. But it's like kind of weird vibes, and sometimes she's like there and sometimes she's not, and she's really intense, and there's like this tension between the two of them that's like, what's the vibe here? Like, what is this woman really doing here? What does she really want? And that's about it. I actually don't even remember how it ended. I don't even remember how it ended. I do know that I enjoyed it. I do know that I finished it and was like, that was a really good book. Thank you to whoever recommended that to me. Again, I can't remember who. Someone on TikTok told me to read this. Whoever you are, thank you. I don't know how to go back and find that comment. Like, there's just no way. So sorry I've forgotten you, but thank you. And I recommend this to you. I do recommend this book despite the fact that I can't remember what it was about or how it ended. I know I enjoyed it and I know it was good and really well written and very like moody and ambient and mysterious. So yeah, my god. Cat owners, you know when you get a whole entire cat hair stuck in your eyeball? Anyways, the next book that I read was, I am so lucky to have this, an advanced copy of Coco Mello's latest novel, Blue Sisters. I know you're all dying to get your hands on this one. And look, I'm actually going to be posting a full review unpacking all of my thoughts soon. So make sure you're subscribed so that you can see the moment I drop that. But let me just say for now that my thoughts, my feelings might be a little unpopular. The third book that I read in April is an Australian novel called Tielines by Sarah Sasson. This one was sent to me from a Firm Press, but it is out now, not an advanced copy. This is out and available now. And look, I'm not going to lie. It took me a while to get into this. When I first got it and I read the synopsis, I was like, I think it's going to be like hit or miss. Like it's either going to be really good or it's just not really going to land for me. And when I started reading it, it was like, I'm not like super into it. Not really invested. I could put it down and not pick it back up sort of thing. But it was the only book that I had taken with me to my boyfriend's place for the weekend. So I did pick it back up and I got really into it. It was a slow start, but we got there. And then I was really enjoying it. It basically follows this woman who is looking back on her childhood. She grew up in this like quiet surf kind of town. She and her brother were really, really close. And in the present day, her brother has recently gone missing. And so this is why she's looking back at their childhood, right? Because she's sort of thinking about her brother's best friend. And she goes back to when they first became friends. And the best friend was like this kind of adventurous, rough around the edges kind of kid, the kind of kid who's sort of like, are they a bad influence? Like, should I be letting my kid hang out with them kind of thing? And so she's looking back because she's like looking for somewhere or something to place her blame, right? For something, some explanation for her brother's kind of downfall and now disappearance, right? But she kind of, as she's looking back, begins to discover that there's a bit more at play. There were sort of other things that might have contributed. And it's very, I don't know, I like how kind of observant and introspective it is and how empathetic it is. Like you do kind of, you look at this best friend figure and you are like, oh yeah, like he led him astray, like he was a bad influence. But as it unpacks it, like, it's just like, it was interesting to interrogate that, right? I don't know how to put it any better than that, but this is a really great book, very Australian, and we all know that I love a very distinctly Australian book, so that alone is like ticking boxes for me. I do recommend this, but it's sort of like, it's like a 3-star book, right? Like, I enjoyed reading it. If you want to read it, go ahead, it's not bad, but I'm not going to sit here and like implore people to go out and read this book. Do you know what I mean? The nonfiction that I read in April was On Women by Susan Sontag. I picked this up at a bookstore because I had to take back a book that my friend had gifted me. It was a book that I had already read, so I went back and I was just browsing and randomly picked this up. I had heard of it, I think, but it certainly wasn't super high on my TBR. I am so glad that I picked this up. I felt, it's one of those books that I felt very smart reading. Do you know what I mean? It's a collection of essays and sort of articles and think pieces and whatever that Susan Sontag published back in the 70s during like the second wave of feminism. And look, it is a bit dated. Some of her comparisons and observations are a little bit problematic, but it was the 70s, right? And I think it's really important to read texts that are dated and have problematic elements because, you know, it has informed where we are today, and it's important to have that context when it comes to issues that you care about. Like for me, women's issues, and seeing where the conversation was back then in the second wave of feminism, the 70s, versus where it is now and what has changed, what hasn't. All of these things, I think it's really important to be informed, and it's really interesting, genuinely. Like I said, it's quite, I don't know, as I've said before, like I'm not a really smart reader, and so it was a bit wordy at times. Like there were some terms and like concepts that I had to really wrap my head around, but it meant that I was learning and I was feeling smart, and I like to feel smart sometimes, you know, and it made me want to read more nonfiction that teaches me things, more informative nonfiction, more on women's issues. I still have Hood Feminism sitting next to my bed because I keep putting it off because I feel like it's going to be like hard work to read it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's going to be brain work. But now I'm like, I think I'm ready. I want to be learning. I want to be informed. So very much recommend this. They are long essays, and I did skip one. I just couldn't get into it at the time. It was about like a very specific thing or a very specific person, and I just like, I just skipped it. But all the rest, they're very good. Very, very good. Highly, highly recommend. And I want to read more of Susan Sontag's writing because she is a very clever lady. Was a very clever lady. I then read the work by Bree Lee, and oh my goodness. Not before reading Laura Elizabeth Willett's scathing review for Kill Your Darlings. Read that first. There is a reason I avoid reviews before I read a book, because I very much will struggle to form my own opinion if I read somebody else's opinion and then read the book. But that review, it was just like, I couldn't not read it the moment I saw it. Everyone was talking about it, and it was wild. It was wild. And so, yes, that skepticism was lingering in my mind when I went into this. But I'll say it straight off the bat. I enjoyed this book. I had a good time reading it. And I know that there is so much criticism out there right now. Almost every review I'm seeing is pulling this book apart. But on one hand, I'm not really smart enough to do that. I can see where they're coming from, and like I understand, like when I read other people's criticisms, I'm like, oh yeah, I see that. But like, I was only able to form a few of my own criticisms while I was reading it. But before I get into that, what was interesting was I kind of forgot what this book was. I think probably because like when I read the synopsis, it's so long and like so overwritten and like unnecessarily complicated and like super detailed. Like it's like the basic synopsis for this book online is like a thesis on the book. Like it's just fucking ridiculous. And so I read that and I registered that it sounded good and I wanted to read it. I remembered that it was about art and work and ambition, that there was a character who lived in Australia and a character who lived in America, and that was about it. For some reason, I decided that the two characters were friends. And so I started reading this book and I was like, when are these two friends going to interact? Are they haven't met yet and they're going to become friends? Or like, I was waiting for them to like email each other or call each other or something. And then I realized that no, these aren't friends. They're going to be lovers. And that was kind of a nice surprise. And I actually really enjoyed the romantic aspect of this book. I found it very relatable. And also just like really nice to read. The protagonists in this book are completely insufferable, and not in like a fun or entertaining way, like an unlikable protagonist is, they just fucking suck. But that didn't even matter that much to me because I still had a great time reading this book. I still enjoyed their relationship. I still enjoyed the commentary around work and ambition versus like love and relationships. I actually even folded down this one page that moved me to tears. This book actually moved me to tears a couple of times, I think. Like that's how much I enjoyed it. Page 225. It was just like it really got me. There was a part in the end that really confused me. I think something went over my head or I missed something. There was like an interaction that made no sense to me. But apart from that, I really loved this book. It was exactly what I wanted to pick up at the time. I feel like I had been reading quite a few like just fine books, and this was the first book in a while that I was really into, and I was like excited to pick it up. Like all I wanted to do with my time was go back to this book. I didn't want to put it down. When I had to put it down, I just wanted to pick it up again. And I haven't felt that for a very long time. And so that was really nice. And yeah, despite all of the criticisms that are totally valid, there are questions to be asked about a lot of Bree's intentions with writing this book. But on a very basic surface level, if you're not looking to critique, it's a really enjoyable read, and I really recommend it. And finally, the last book that I read in April was Antiquity. There you go. Antiquity by Hannah Johansson. Now, this was sent to me by Scribe. Scribe surprised me with a beautiful little package of 3 books, and I read the blurb, and this shot straight to the top of my TBR. Like, I literally started reading it the day it arrived, I think, and I never do that. But the blurb describes this book as, it compares it to Call Me By Your Name, and essentially describes it as like a lesbian Lolita. And I don't know about you, but like to invoke Call Me By Your Name is to suggest a certain element of lust and passion and sexual tension, at least in my mind, right? So I read these things and it all was creating a vibe in my mind, and I was like, this sounds like my perfect book. Also, it just has an amazing cover. The comparisons were not anything to do with style or vibe. They were simply about premise. Like, yeah, this is a story fundamentally about a 30-something woman who gets feelings for a 15-year-old girl, which is like objectively fucked, right? But this is more like rooted in setting. Like, this is a very kind of ambient book that is really just more about like she's observing her surroundings and like talking about where she is. She's like in Greece on a holiday essentially, and it's just talking a lot about Greece and the house and the weather and all of this stuff, right? Like, it's very much a lot of vibes and not much else, which could be really beautiful. Like, that's not objectively a bad thing, right? But there was something about the narrator that was just like unlikable, like unpleasant. I think she was like too whingy or judgmental or something. Like, I mean, she was jealous of and then sexually attracted to a child. So there's that. But yeah, like based on the blurb, I was expecting the book to be a lot more about the relationship and for it to be portrayed more kind of lusty and passionately, which is like a fucked thing to say about this kind of story, right? But like, we know how they can be. Like, we've all at least watched, if not read, Call Me By Your Name. Like, you can be manipulated as a reader by the style of like how the story is told. But it wasn't like that. It was like nothing happened between the two of them, first of all, until like beyond the halfway mark. She spends the whole first half of the book like being weirdly jealous of this girl and like not liking her or whatever because she's like there with her mother. I don't know. And then when things do happen, it's just like kind of icky and uncomfortable. And I really thought this was going to be like a book that I could describe as beautiful. And it just wasn't. It just didn't sit right for me. It didn't land. And I'm really disappointed because I was really excited to read it and the cover is amazing and it sounds really good and it just wasn't. And I do wonder if it is like another case of like, I don't know if you watched my March wrap up and heard me talking about Fragile Animal by Genevieve Jagger, like it could be another case of just my expectations were not aligned with what the book actually was. And if I'd known what it was actually going to be like going into it, if I'd have enjoyed it more. Because I don't think it certainly wasn't badly written. It just didn't do it for me. So there we go. Those are the 6 books that I read in April. And I'm sure you can see what I mean now when I say that, like, I enjoyed most of them. They were fine, but I only loved one. And because of that, I think what I want to do this month is have like a really indulgent reading month and just get a bunch of like cushy, relatable girly reads that I'm like excited to read, right? Because after reading the work and like remembering how into a book I can be, I just hadn't felt that for a long time and I want to feel that like back to back to back. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a little or maybe like medium-sized Booktopia order and I'm going to get a bunch of books that I have been holding out for like an obscenely long amount of time, like over a year. Some of these books have been on my TBR for really, I mean, I was going to say no good reason, but like saving money. And I told myself, like with a lot of these, I kind of told myself if I like stumbled upon any of them in a bookstore, I would grab them, but I haven't. I have not seen any of these in bookstores. So books like Sirens and Muses, The Cursed Bread, We Do What We Do in the Dark. There are so many books that have been sitting on my TBR that I'm dying to read, but have never gone and got them or read them. Right? So I think that's what I want to do this month. I just want to read a bunch of books that I'm really excited about and just have a really good time. And hopefully that means I can smash out like quite a few because I'll just like not want to put them down. Do you know what I mean? So these ARCs and review copies sitting on my shelf, they're just going to have to wait a little bit because Mum wants to have some fun. Thank you so much if you are still watching this video. It means the world to me that you would sit through all of these ramblings. Let me know what your favorite read was from last month in the comments. I would love to hear it. I am always looking for recommendations. My TBR is endless and always will be, and I've accepted that. And so I'm gonna just keep adding to it. I will see you in my next video. Love ya.